Montana Territory, 1875. The prairie wind carried the scent of wildflowers as 15-year-old Molly Grayson stood on the porch of their ranch house, hands on hips, watching her father struggle with a tear in his only decent shirt. The sight of Victor Daniels, the most formidable cattle rancher in Whitetail Valley, helplessly jabbing a needle through fabric only to prick his calloused finger for the third time, filled her with equal parts amusement and heartache. "Damnation," he muttered, sucking on his wounded digit before noticing his daughter's presence. "Pardon my language, Molly girl. Let me help you, Papa," she said, crossing the weathered boards to take the mangled shirt from his hands. For years since her mother's passing, and still neither of them had mastered the domestic arts Margaret Grayson had performed with such grace. Victor surrendered the garment with a sigh of relief. "Don't know how your mother managed it all." "None of us do," Molly replied softly, examining the tear with practiced resignation. She'd become passable at cooking and cleaning since her mother's death, but mending remained beyond her abilities. This shirt, like the ranch, was slowly falling apart without a woman's touch. Victor Daniels was still a handsome man at 42, with weathered features that spoke of hard work rather than hardship, and eyes that, despite the grief they'd known, still crinkled at the corners when he laughed, though that laughter had grown increasingly rare in recent years. As Molly struggled with the needle, she glanced at her father. His gaze had drifted toward the mountains that framed their valley, the same distant look he'd worn more and more lately. It wasn't just a wife he'd lost, but a partner in the enormous task of running the Double D Ranch. The burden had aged him beyond his years. "What's troubling you, Papa?" she asked, though she already knew. "Nothing for you to worry about, sweet pea. I'm not a child anymore. I know we're struggling." Victor's shoulders slumped slightly. "Just thinking about all there is to do before winter. Fence in the north pasture needs mending, barn roof's got that leak, and the ledgers." He trailed off, rubbing his temples at the mention of the ranch accounts. Molly abandoned the shirt and placed her hand on his arm. "You need help. That's what ranch hands are for. Not that kind of help." She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. "Papa, you need a wife." Victor stiffened. "Absolutely not. That subject is closed, Molly Elizabeth." "But no buts. Your mother was 1 in a million. And you deserve to be happy again. We both do." Before Victor could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Matthew Jenkins, the town's young postmaster, rode up to their fence post, waving a handful of letters. "Morning, Mr. Daniels." "Miss Molly," he called cheerfully. "Got quite a bundle for you today." Molly rushed down to meet him, grateful for the interruption. At 17, Matthew had taken over the post when his father fell ill last year. His freckled face broke into a wide smile as she approached. "Thank you, Matthew," she said, taking the letters. "Would you like some water before you continue your rounds?" "Much obliged," he replied, dismounting with a practiced swing of his leg. As Molly poured him a cup from the porch pitcher, she noticed an unusual newspaper among the mail. "What's this?" "Ah, that came special from back east. Been seeing a lot of those lately." Molly unfolded the paper to find it wasn't a newspaper at all, but rather a special edition called the Matrimonial News. Her eyes widened as she scanned the pages filled with advertisements from women seeking husbands in the West. Matthew leaned closer, lowering his voice. "My pa says half the ranchers in Montana found wives this way. After the war, there's too many women back east and not enough men." A plan began forming in Molly's mind as she studied the neat columns of personal advertisements. Women of all ages and backgrounds, seeking a fresh start and willing to journey west for the promise of marriage. "Interesting reading, isn't it?" Matthew said with a knowing grin. "Especially that one there." He pointed to an advertisement that read, "Widow, 38, refined and educated, seeks gentleman rancher of good character, experienced in household management and bookkeeping." Molly's heart quickened. Bookkeeping was exactly what her father needed help with. But Victor would never agree to such a scheme. Unless, "Well, I should be on my way," Matthew said, draining his cup. "Got deliveries all the way to the Henderson place." After Matthew departed, Molly tucked the matrimonial paper under her arm and returned to her father, a new determination in her step. If Papa wouldn't find himself a wife, perhaps it was up to her to find one for him. "What's caught your interest there?" Victor asked, nodding toward the folded paper. "Oh, just some news from back east," she replied innocently, already formulating her plan. Nothing important. Little did Victor know that his daughter's scheme would soon bring changes to the Double D Ranch that neither of them could imagine, changes that would test them both and, perhaps, heal the wounds that had been festering for too long. That night, after her father had retired to bed, Molly sat at the kitchen table with a stub of pencil and her mother's writing paper. The matrimonial newspaper lay open before her, illuminated by the flickering light of a kerosene lamp. She'd selected 5 advertisements that seemed most promising, women who mentioned practical skills rather than just seeking security or adventure. "Forgive me, Mama," she whispered to the empty room. "But he needs someone, and he's too stubborn to see it." With careful penmanship, Molly began her first letter. "Dear Madam, I am writing in response to your advertisement in the matrimonial news. My name is Victor Daniels, a rancher of substantial holdings in Montana Territory." She paused, guilt washing over her. Was she betraying her mother's memory? The thought nagged at her until she glanced at her father's worn account book, filled with Margaret Grayson's neat figures in the early pages, followed by Victor's increasingly disorganized entries after her death. No, this wasn't betrayal. This was survival. With renewed determination, Molly continued writing long into the night. 2 months passed without reply, and Molly had nearly given up hope when Matthew Jenkins arrived with a letter bearing an unfamiliar feminine hand. Heart racing, she slipped it into her pocket before her father could notice, waiting until she was alone in the barn to tear it open. "Dear Mr. Daniels, your letter arrived at a most fortuitous time. I have been considering several offers of correspondence, but yours spoke to me in a way the others did not. Your description of Montana's beauty and the challenges of raising a daughter alone moved me deeply. I am a widow of 3 years, having lost my husband to pneumonia. While I have managed adequately here in Boston, the prospect of beginning anew in the West holds great appeal. My training as a teacher and experience managing my late husband's mercantile accounts might prove useful in your ranching enterprise. If you wish to continue this correspondence, I would be most pleased. Sincerely, Millicent Grant." Molly clutched the letter to her chest, breathing a prayer of thanks. Millicent Grant. Even her name sounded competent and kind. Over the following weeks, more letters arrived, each one revealing a woman of intelligence, practicality, and gentle humor. Through Molly's carefully crafted replies, Victor and Millicent developed a correspondence that grew increasingly personal. As autumn painted the Montana landscape in golds and reds, Molly faced a dilemma. The deception couldn't continue indefinitely. Millicent's latest letter had hinted at the possibility of a meeting, and Molly knew the moment of truth was approaching. One evening, as she and Victor sat by the fire, she gathered her courage. "Papa, what would you say if I told you I've done something either very foolish or very wise, but I'm not sure which?" Victor looked up from his whittling, raising a skeptical eyebrow. "That would depend entirely on what you've done, daughter. I've found someone to help us with the ranch. We can't afford another hand right now, Molly. You know that. Not a ranch hand. Someone who could help with the accounts, the household, and—" She took a deep breath. "And be a companion to you." Victor's knife stilled. "What exactly have you done?" With trembling hands, Molly retrieved the bundle of letters from their hiding place in her sewing basket and placed them in her father's lap. "I wrote to a woman in Boston. She thinks she's been corresponding with you these past months." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Victor's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to anger as he scanned the letters. "You had no right," he finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. "No right at all. I know, but Papa, please read what she's written before you judge. She's wonderful, intelligent, practical, and kind. And she understands loss, just like we do. This is a cruel trick, Molly. To this woman and to me. It started that way, maybe, but it's become something real." Molly knelt beside her father's chair. "She helps manage accounts and taught school. The ranch is failing, Papa. We both know it. And you've been so lonely." Victor's jaw tightened as he stood abruptly. "I'm going for a ride." "Papa, please, we'll discuss this when I return." The front door slammed behind him, and Molly was left alone with her guilt and the fear that she had irreparably damaged her relationship with the person she loved most in the world. Victor didn't return until well after dark. When he entered the house, His expression was unreadable. He placed Millicent's letters carefully on the table between them. "I read them all," he said quietly. "You're right about one thing. She seems like a fine woman." Hope blossomed in Molly's chest. "Then you're not angry?" "I didn't say that." He sighed heavily. "But what's done is done. The question is what to do now." "We could invite her to visit," Molly suggested tentatively. "If you don't like her, she need never know about my deception. I'll take the blame." Victor studied his daughter's face. "When did you get to be so grown up and so foolhardy at the same time?" "I learned from the best," she replied with a small smile. Despite his resistance, Molly could see her father was intrigued by the woman in the letters. Over the next week, they argued, negotiated, and finally reached a compromise. Victor would write to Millicent himself, truthfully, explaining that his daughter had initiated the correspondence but that he was now genuinely interested in making her acquaintance. "If she's half the woman she appears to be in these letters," Victor said as he sealed his missive, "she'll understand why you did what you did. And if she doesn't, then she's not the woman for us, is she?" The wait for Millicent's response was agonizing. When it finally came, Molly could hardly bear to watch as her father read it privately. When he emerged from his study, his expression gave nothing away. "Well?" Molly demanded. A slow smile spread across Victor's face. "She's coming. End of the month." Millicent's imminent arrival threw the Double D Ranch into a flurry of activity. Molly scrubbed the house from top to bottom, mended curtains, and badgered the ranch hands to repair everything in sight. Victor, meanwhile, grew increasingly nervous, checking and rechecking the train schedule, and even purchasing a new shirt from the general store, the first new clothing he'd bought since Margaret died. As the stagecoach day approached, a new worry surfaced. What if she takes one look at this place and decides to return east on the next train? Molly fretted, surveying their modest home with fresh eyes. "Then she's not the practical woman she claims to be," Victor replied, though Molly noticed he'd taken extra care with his appearance that morning, trimming his beard and polishing his worn boots. The day of Millicent's arrival dawned clear and crisp. Molly and Victor rode into town together, tension thick between them. The stagecoach was due at noon, and they arrived at the station with nearly an hour to spare. "You're fidgeting worse than a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs," Sheriff Tom Wallace remarked as he passed them on his rounds. "Got a visitor coming," Victor muttered, adjusting his collar for the dozenth time. The sheriff's eyes twinkled knowingly. Would this visitor happen to be the Boston lady Matthew Jenkins has been talking about? Molly groaned. "Does everyone in town know our business?" "It's a small town, Miss Molly. Not much happens without everyone knowing." He tipped his hat. "Good luck to you both." As the sheriff walked away, Molly noticed her father staring down the road, his expression a mixture of anticipation and dread. "It'll be fine, Papa," she assured him, though her own stomach was tied in knots. "What if she's nothing like her letters?" he asked quietly. "Then we thank her for coming, show her a nice time, and send her home with no hard feelings." Victor nodded absently, still watching the road. The minutes crawled by until, finally, the distant rumble of the stagecoach could be heard. "Here we go," Molly whispered, slipping her hand into her father's. The stagecoach rolled to a stop in a cloud of dust, and for a moment, everything seemed to pause. Then the door opened, and a woman stepped down. Millicent Grant was not what Molly had expected. From her letters, she had imagined someone sturdy and practical-looking, perhaps with spectacles and a severe hairstyle. Instead, the woman before them was slender and elegant, with warm brown eyes and chestnut hair tucked neatly beneath a modest traveling hat. Though not conventionally beautiful, there was something immediately appealing about her composed demeanor and the intelligence in her gaze. Molly felt her father stiffen beside her, and when she glanced at him, she was startled by the expression on his face, a look of wonder she hadn't seen since her mother was alive. The station master approached the newcomer. "Mrs. Grant? Welcome to Whitetail." "Thank you," she replied, her voice clear and pleasant with just a hint of an Eastern accent. "I believe someone is expecting me." Victor stepped forward, removing his hat. "Mrs. Grant, Victor Daniels." He extended his hand, which she took without hesitation. "And this is my daughter, Molly." Millicent's gaze shifted to Molly, and there was a moment of assessment before her expression softened into a smile. "The famous Molly. I feel I know you already." Molly blushed, uncertain whether to feel flattered or mortified. "Welcome to Montana, Mrs. Grant. Please, call me Millicent. She turned back to Victor. I must say, Mr. Daniels, your handwriting improved remarkably over the course of our correspondence. Victor shot Molly a look that was half amusement, half warning. Yes, well, about that. Perhaps we could discuss it somewhere less public? Millicent suggested gently, glancing around at the curious onlookers who had gathered to witness the arrival of the Eastern lady. Of course, Victor agreed. We've prepared a room for you at our home, unless you'd prefer to stay in town. I came to see how you live, Mr. Daniels. I would very much like to see your ranch. As Victor helped load Millicent's trunk onto their wagon, Molly noticed the sideways glances they were receiving from townsfolk. Word of the Boston lady's arrival had clearly spread, and every person within eyeshot seemed to be finding excuses to pass by the station. The ride back to the ranch was filled with polite conversation that carefully avoided the subject of the misleading correspondence. Millicent commented on the beauty of the landscape, asked intelligent questions about ranching, and drew Molly out about her education and interests. By the time they reached the Double D, some of the tension had eased, though Victor remained uncharacteristically quiet, stealing glances at their guest when he thought no one was looking. This is lovely, Millicent said as the ranch house came into view, nestled against a backdrop of pine-covered hills. So different from Boston. It's nothing grand, Victor replied, suddenly self-conscious about the weathered porch and faded paint. It's a home, Millicent said simply. That's what matters. Once inside, Molly showed Millicent to the guest room, which had once been her mother's sewing room. They'd done their best to make it comfortable, with fresh linens and wildflowers in a jar by the window. I'll leave you to rest after your journey, Molly said, hovering awkwardly in the doorway. Supper will be ready at 6. Thank you, Molly. Millicent paused, then added, I'm looking forward to getting to know you. The real you, not just the girl who wrote such convincing letters in her father's name. Molly's cheeks burned. I'm sorry about that. I never meant to deceive you. Well, I did, but not in a harmful way. I understand more than you might think, Millicent replied with a gentle smile. Now go help your father. I suspect he's even more nervous than you are. At supper that evening, the three of them sat around the kitchen table, the awkwardness returning as they faced the inevitable conversation. Victor cleared his throat after they'd finished the stew Molly had prepared. Mrs. Grant, Millicent, I believe I owe you an explanation and an apology. You've explained the situation in your letter, Mr. Daniels. Molly wrote to me pretending to be you, and when you discovered her deception, you decided to continue the correspondence honestly. Yes, but I want you to know I never would have initiated such a thing. He glanced at Molly. My daughter, while well-intentioned, overstepped her bounds. Millicent set down her fork. May I speak frankly? Victor nodded, bracing himself. When I first received Molly's letter, or rather, your letter written by Molly, I was struck by how different it was from the others I had received. There was a warmth and honesty to it, despite the deception. She smiled at Molly. You have a gift for words, young lady. Molly looked down, unsure whether to feel proud or ashamed. As our correspondence continued, Millicent went on. I began to feel I knew this Montana rancher and his daughter. Then came your letter, Mr. Daniels, your actual letter, explaining the truth. I admit I was briefly angry, but then I realized something. She met Victor's gaze directly. I wanted to meet you both, regardless. The ranch, the struggles, the teenage daughter with too much responsibility on her young shoulders. All of it was real, even if the initial introduction was not. A weight seemed to lift from the room. Victor's shoulders relaxed visibly. You're very understanding, Millicent. Life has taught me that intentions matter. Molly's were good, if misguided. She turned to Molly. Though I do hope you've learned that honesty is the better policy. Yes, ma'am, Molly replied, relief washing through her. Now, Millicent continued briskly. I've come a very long way, and I'd like to get to know you both properly. I propose a 2-week visit. At the end of that time, we can decide if there's any basis for further acquaintance. Victor nodded slowly. That seems fair. Excellent. Millicent's smile brightened the room. And perhaps tomorrow, you might show me those account books Molly mentioned? I'm quite good with figures. For the first time since Millicent's arrival, Victor laughed, a genuine sound that made Molly's heart leap with hope. I have a feeling you're quite good at a great many things, Mrs. Grant. The following days established a rhythm as Millicent found her place at the Double D. Mornings were spent with Victor, reviewing the ranch accounts and discussing business matters. Afternoons often found her with Molly, teaching the girl better sewing techniques or sharing books she had brought from Boston. In the evenings, the three would gather by the fire, conversation flowing more easily with each passing day. By the end of the first week, the transformation was remarkable. The ranch house, while still modest, had taken on a new warmth with Millicent's touch. Curtains hung straighter, surfaces gleamed, and somehow the rooms seemed brighter. But the most noticeable change was in Victor himself. "He's smiling again," Molly confided to Millicent as they hung laundry on the line behind the house. "Really smiling, not just pretending for my sake." "Your father is a good man who's carried a heavy burden," Millicent replied, efficiently pinning a sheet against the prairie wind. "Sometimes all it takes is a little help to lighten the load." "Is that why you came? To help?" Millicent paused, considering her words carefully. "I came because I was curious about the man in the letters, both the man I thought wrote them and the man who actually did. And because at my age, opportunities for a new beginning are rare." "Do you like him?" Molly asked bluntly. "My father, I mean." A slight blush colored Millicent's cheeks. "I respect him greatly." "That's not what I asked." "You're very direct for a young lady." "Papa says I get that from my mother." At the mention of Margaret, something flickered in Millicent's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or concern. "Your mother must have been a remarkable woman." "She was," Molly agreed, then added quietly. "But she wouldn't have wanted Papa to be alone forever." Before Millicent could respond, the sound of hoofbeats announced Victor's return from checking the herd. Both women turned to watch as he dismounted with the easy grace of a lifelong horseman. "Ladies," he called, removing his hat as he approached. "Fine day for laundry." "Perfect day," Millicent agreed, and Molly didn't miss the way her father's gaze lingered on their visitor, or how Millicent's cheeks flushed deeper under his attention. That evening, after Molly had retired to bed, she lay awake listening to the murmur of voices from the porch where Victor and Millicent sat talking. Though she couldn't make out the words, there was a rhythm to their conversation that spoke of growing comfort and connection. The next morning at breakfast, Victor announced his intention to ride into town. "Need to see about some supplies," he explained, not quite meeting either woman's eyes. "Might be gone most of the day." After he left, Millicent turned to Molly with a determined expression. "I believe it's time you showed me your mother's grave." The request startled Molly. "How did you know I visit her? You disappear every Sunday afternoon." It wasn't difficult to surmise where you might be going. The small family cemetery lay on a gentle slope overlooking the ranch, a peaceful spot where generations of Daniels had been laid to rest. Margaret's grave was marked by a simple stone, lovingly maintained and often adorned with wildflowers. Millicent stood respectfully beside Molly, hat in hand, as the girl knelt to clear away dead leaves from the marker. "She loved this view," Molly said after a while. "Said she could see heaven and earth meeting right here on our land." "She sounds like a poet." "She was practical mostly, but she found beauty everywhere." Molly ran her fingers over the engraved name. "Papa was lost when she died. We both were." Millicent knelt beside her, careful of her skirts. "May I ask how it happened?" "Fever. It came on suddenly and burned through her so fast the doctor couldn't do anything." Molly swallowed hard. "Papa didn't leave her side for 3 days, not even to eat or sleep. He loved her very deeply." "Yes," Molly agreed, then turned to look directly at Millicent. "That's why I wrote to you. Not just because we needed help with the ranch, but because Papa deserves to love someone again. To be loved." Millicent was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful as she gazed at the grave. "Do you think your mother would approve of what you did?" "Mama was practical about most things, but romantic about love. She'd say I went about it all wrong, but she'd understand why." A smile tugged at the corners of Millicent's mouth. "I believe I would have liked your mother very much." "She would have liked you too," Molly said with sudden certainty. "You're nothing alike, but you both see things clearly." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the prairie wind rustling through the grass around them. Finally, Millicent spoke again. "Molly, I need to be honest with you about something." "What is it?" "Your father asked me last night if I would consider staying, not just for a visit, but permanently." Molly's heart leapt. "What did you say?" "I told him I needed to be sure of 2 things before I could answer. First, that he was proposing for the right reasons, not just because he needs help with the ranch and you. And second, that you would truly welcome my presence in your home and your life. Millicent met her gaze steadily. I would never come between you and your father, Molly. Nor would I try to replace your mother. I know that, Molly said firmly. And I want you to stay. Not just for Papa, but for me too. I've missed having another woman around. Millicent reached out to squeeze Molly's hand. Then I believe I have an answer to give your father when he returns. When Victor rode in that afternoon, he carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. His expression was a mixture of nervousness and determination as he found Millicent and Molly in the kitchen preparing supper. Could I speak with you privately, Millicent? He asked, the package clutched tightly in his hand. Of course. As they stepped onto the porch, Molly moved to the window, pretending to check on the biscuits in the oven while actually straining to hear the conversation outside. I've been thinking about what we discussed last night, Victor was saying, his voice carrying just enough for Molly to catch. About you staying on. Yes, I've been considering it carefully as well. Before you give me your answer, there's something I want you to have. He handed her the package. It's not much, but where I come from, intentions matter. Millicent unwrapped the paper to reveal a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers. It's lovely, Victor. Open it. Inside lay a simple silver band with a small pearl. It was my mother's, Victor explained. Nothing fancy, but solid. Like what I'm offering you. Millicent's voice was soft when she replied, Are you certain this is what you want? It's been only 2 weeks. I've spent 4 years thinking I'd never find anyone I could imagine sharing my life with again. Then you stepped off that stagecoach. He took her hands in his. I'm not asking for an answer today. Take all the time you need. I don't need more time, Millicent said with quiet conviction. I came west looking for a new beginning, and I believe I've found it here, with you and Molly. From her vantage point at the window, Molly watched as her father gently placed the ring on Millicent's finger, then leaned forward to kiss her with a tenderness that brought tears to the girl's eyes. The wedding took place 2 months later in the town church, with what seemed like the entire community in attendance. Millicent wore a dove-gray silk dress ordered from Denver, and Victor looked more handsome than Molly had ever seen him in his new suit. But it was the expressions on their faces, joy mingled with a deep, abiding respect, that truly reflected the significance of the day. As the small but joyful reception wound down at the ranch, Molly found herself momentarily alone with Sheriff Wallace. Quite a matchmaker you turned out to be, Miss Molly, he remarked, tipping his punch cup toward where Victor and Millicent were receiving congratulations from the ranch hands. Sometimes people need a little help finding what's right in front of them, she replied with a smile. Indeed they do. The sheriff cleared his throat. Speaking of which, young Matthew Jenkins has been looking for you. Last I saw, he was by the refreshment table, gathering his courage. Molly blushed. Matthew's just a friend. If you say so, the sheriff replied with a knowing wink before moving away. As the guests gradually departed and the sun began to set, Victor found Molly sitting on the porch steps. Happy, Papa? She asked as he lowered himself beside her. More than I thought possible again. He put his arm around her shoulders. Your mama would be proud of you, you know. Not for the deception, he added with a mock stern look, but for your heart. Do you think she would approve? Of Millicent, I mean. Victor was quiet for a moment, gazing out at the land that had been his life's work. I think she sent her to us. Inside the house, they could hear Millicent humming as she moved about the kitchen, already at home in the space that had stood empty of a woman's presence for too long. You know what this means, don't you? Victor said, a twinkle in his eye. What? You'll have to learn to mend your own dresses now. Millicent will be too busy keeping me in line. Molly laughed, leaning her head against her father's shoulder. I think we can work something out. As they sat there in the gathering dusk, the Double D Ranch seemed to breathe a collective sigh of contentment. The past would always be with them, honored and remembered, but now the future stretched before them, bright with new possibilities. From her matchmaking schemes had grown something authentic and precious, a second chance at family for them all.